My recent video where I talked about Nick Cannon's crazy religious views, a commenter left me this comment. It says, God is black. Daniel 7:9 and Revelation 4:3 describes what God looks like. Once you read Revelations, Google those colors and you will see what color he really is. Now, to some of you watching, this might shock you because you probably have never heard this before, but I've heard this argument plenty of times. The argument is usually made by the black Hebrew Israelites, who you may or may not have heard of. The one Western Hebrew Israelites don't only teach that God and Jesus were black, but they also teach that God actually hates white people, since they believe that whites are descendants of Esau. This is why you'll hear them say stuff like this.
This scripture means that the white man is the devil.
We don't hate white people, but God hates white people.
Now, before we talk about whether or not God is black and if God is a racist, we can first ask the question of what makes someone black. The reason why I ask this is because according to people like Joe Biden, you can tell if someone is black based on who they vote for.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
According to Nick Cannon, it's the amount of melatonin that you have in your skin.
And when I say we, I speak of the melanated people.
According to people on Twitter, it's fashion related, like wearing braids, since they bash non-blacks for wearing things like braids and accuse them of cultural appropriation. And according to others, it's how you talk.
Yesterday I got this comment, you sound white.
I think that covers most of the options. So now when it comes to God, God isn't voting for a political party, so we can go ahead and X that one off the list right away.
And you ain't black.
So now we're just left wondering if God is black because of his skin color, or how he dresses, or how he talks. Now, when it comes to physical things like how God dresses and his skin color, the Bible makes it incredibly clear that God is not physical. Physical descriptions are either theophanies or they're intentionally anthropomorphizing in order to convey truths about God in human terms, which seems pretty clear given most of the physical descriptions. And this is why you don't see people arguing that God's body looks like a burning bush. It seems obvious, but you know. So if God isn't physical, then obviously God can't be physically black or white, since skin color is something that's physical by definition. But if we return to the biblical evidence provided by the commenter, we're provided with two verses. The first one is in Daniel 7. The verse that apparently proves God's blackness says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. So now if you're left scratching your head wondering if you missed the part that says that God is black, I assume that you're not alone here. I think the part that's supposed to prove God's blackness is where it says that his hair was like wool. Now here's worth noting that the hair being gray, by the way, not black, and like wool, is likely imagery that was meant to communicate God's wisdom, but more on that in a second. The commentator also cited Revelation 4:3, where John describes his vision of God. The verse says, and the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. And then the commentator said to Google jasper and ruby in order to see what color God is. And so I did. And here's what I came up with. So as you can see, jasper comes in a lot of different colors, and ruby, as we all know, is red. So I guess that we can conclude that God was rainbow or red, right? Yeah, I don't think so either. But even if jasper and rubies were black or brown, notice that the passage doesn't say that God had the skin color of jasper or ruby. Instead, it says that God had the appearance of jasper and ruby, kind of like the verse just before it, which says, and the first voice, which I heard, was as it were of a trumpet talking with me. Now, I assume that our commenter doesn't think that God talks in trumpet, right? And if not, then they shouldn't think that God's skin is made of jasper or rubies. But what if we say that God is black based on his culture or how he talks? Well, since God didn't come from the earth, it obviously can't be cultural. And given that the Israelites only use the King James Version of the Bible, saying that God is black based on how he talks seems to be even more ridiculous. I mean, based on only words, how black does it sound when God says, thou hast forsaken me, saith the Lord, thou art gone backward? Yeah, you tell me. Now, if you want to talk about the time that God took on human flesh as Jesus Christ of Nazareth, then Jesus wasn't black or white. So sorry to all the black and white racists out there. We have a really good idea of the skin color that Jesus had based on the region that he was born into. But if you ever wonder why the Gospels don't record the skin color of Jesus, it's because it didn't matter to them, and it shouldn't matter to us either. Now, personally, I couldn't care less if Jesus was black, white, green, purple. I genuinely don't care. All that really matters to me is that God offered us eternal salvation in him by simply believing in him and trusting in him for our salvation. This doesn't apply to people with a specific skin color, but it applies to everyone who chooses to trust him. God made a way for us, not because of our skin color or the family we were born into or anything like that. The only way that we can be saved from ourselves is because of what Christ did for us, not based on what we didn't do by being born into a specific family with a specific skin color. Now, all of this sort of makes sense because the gospel also tells us that we're all sinners. And part of being a sinner is our tendency to create God in our own image. We all want God to look more like us so that way we can feel better about ourselves, instead of trying to find ways that we can look more like God. And when we do that, we truly find our true selves. And by the way, if Captain Obvious isn't around, when I say look like God, I mean that based on our behavior and functions, not our physical appearance. So now some people might be wondering, if our skin color isn't significant, then why does the Bible teach slavery? So all these questions around the Bible and slavery are what I actually respond to in this short series on the Bible and slavery. So go ahead and click here to get started. And the next time that you see white or black racists trying to create God in their own image, what are you going to say?